Alrighty, we're back.
Start drinking some water.
We're back here again with Tim Beck, the Godfather, talking to rocketed through the history of cannabis before Michigan. Is this Romina? Showed up? Yeah. Great. We left off the campaign against was really ineffective. The voting for the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act was more than any other vote ever in the history of Michigan voting. And it passed overwhelmingly, majority in every single county, all 82 of them. And bam, it passed. And Tim has described himself, he was a kind of an exile. And MPP did not stick around. And there was... explain what was going on there, like how because for people that understand, the law passed, it's overwhelming. Now what?
Yeah.
Where do you go? What do you do? Yeah. What happens, Tim? To explain how that thing played out.
What happened is that there was a panic within the state bureaucracy and within the state government. Is how do we handle this and what do we do? The rules that we laid out apparently to them weren't plain enough. They weren't specific enough, or they didn't get it, or it needed clarification. And they came up with a laundry list. It was an administrative agency, the Department of Health, actually. I believe that's what it was, They had stuff. Well, I remember one specific rule was that to deal with overages. If you're a caregiver or a patient or whatever, if you went over, you had to turn the marijuana. You had to surrender it to the state police.
That
sounds feasible.
So let's talk about this, because this is an important part of this whole history here. Because you got to imagine, the law passes, there's like a bureaucratic nightmare. They don't know what to do. Their only stab at getting some control over this is through the administrative rulemaking. It's the board. What is it? The Department of Community Health. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
As opposed to Lara, which ultimately
right.
took over. They were the ones that were in charge. That's no longer a department in Michigan, and they were writing administrative rules which allowed the citizens to come and comment on it. They were making ridiculous rules. Some of these, the state police had influenced much of that, and there were some important moments, as we were discussing a little bit before, of people that kind of showed up and really made an impact and set the tone for some of the activism for medical marijuana. Explain some of that stuff.
Well, I would say Greg Francisco was a true hero, a true thinker ahead, and he knew, everybody kind of knew that this one and only hearing, was going to come up, and the Bureau said it pretty early in January, so people didn't get a lot of time, but Greg anticipated that coming up. And he got people together. They prepared for it. I think he even had buses or something that went up there. But and I was not involved in it in any way. This was Greg's project, and he did it. He did it. He did it very well. And they had people that they refuted these administrative whatever agents, and an MPP, to their credit, brought in Karen O'Keefe, their top legal specialist, and the one that had the most to do with actually writing the law. It was her, and so she came in and she gave blown out testimony. Really, really good testimony. And then there was other people like Greg and some others that got up, just regular folks. And they came up with real practical problems with this. And these bureaucrats, they were in over their head. They realized that the vehemence, the anger, they obviously didn't know what they were doing. The state police, as they said, well, no, we don't want the excess marijuana. No, that's not. We're not interested in that, and among other things. And then there was a lack of rules, in essence. Nobody wanted to, and things started to evolve. And you had people, starting dispensaries, and they're doing all kinds of things to fill in the gaps when there's no legislation or so-called rules.
And you may even be talking about the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, even before the department had, which April was when it really was enacted, and there wasn't even a department. They did have the administrative rule that until the department, your recommendation could serve. If they made it, whatever.
Well, and none of these people even worked on it because they didn't know. They thought it was going to fail. They didn't think it was going to pass. So what do we have to spend our time on this stuff? Well.
Yeah.
And then they came up with it in a panic
with
this goofball stuff because the law went into effect
April 2009.
Yeah, well, yes, that's right. That's correct, yes.
After the
December 4th,
2008.
That's what was it? It was
the cards started in April.
the department started issuing cards in April.
Yeah.
You couldn't get a card until then.
Right.
Even
That's
though
correct.
after 2008, a doctor could sign a recommendation, a recommendation, and if you to be defendable, I guess, And we know Bob Brennan was the first issue. I mean, remember, but so all right, so that's and you're talking.
But Greg, I mean, he, like I say, I have to give the man credit. I mean, he really stepped up. He was a primary catalyst, and then he took the movement further. I mean, he had a number of kind of extravaganza, kind of things and stuff where it's right out there, and so, again, it helped, things evolve, and then of course there's the McQueen case, and no dispensaries, or at least it was clouded at that point, but in between there was this back and forth that went on.
Yeah, there is an interesting time in that regard, and I think, Greg had the foresight. I know. I was not. I don't know. I know, and had heard his testimony at the administrative rules, and I like the way that you described the.
Well, his greatest thing was that his accomplishment was that handling that hearing. That was crucial. That was very, 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 very critical.
Yeah.
That's his greatest accomplishment, in my opinion.
And he kind of set the tone for being, like as a kind of a position as leader. And, one of the things that maybe even it had more of an impact because you were in exile was that there was a vacuum of a platform for medical marijuana. I mean, Normal was about legalization. There wasn't anything like really specific for patients. And I think Greg saw that, and I think, he in Detroit, they did a couple big events right out of the gate that kind of brought the community together, and he kind of set the tone for that. And I think he was even, the MMA as the organization, which we've involved with now, it's much different than, and a lot has gone on since then. And I think you mentioned the point that since McQueen and the dispensaries, and I think that's really what changed all this. I mean, there could be an internal debate within the community. I mean, external debate with the law enforcement or legislatures about the interpretation from within. What does it really mean? Is it a caregiver system where it's a limited supply? Does it allow for sales? Is there what does compensation for costs mean as it's written?
Well, it was done deliberately that way. Basically, now they would not admit that. Some people would not admit that, but that really was the agenda.
I agree. I've described it as it gets criticized as a poorly written law because it's an initiative. And I say, well, in order for it to become the law, every legislature got a chance to vote on it. Because it has to, before it becomes law, they have to at least approve that the as written reflects the ballot initiative. They have a legal authority to do that as they have passed, and they did that. And someone within their own legislative body for law writing proposed the law, came up with it. It may have been so they all, and it was all voted on. And so it's crazy when they say poorly written after the fact because they all had a say, even though it's they may have written otherwise. But as we go into it, it was I always say it was written intended to be broadly written and broadly interpreted to cover a vast majority of different types of scenarios that obviously couldn't be specifically articulated in. And unfortunately, all right. So what happened? So let's see. We have let's see from the organ.
It was written to basically to deal with the federal government. Back then, that was a primary thing with this caregiver thing. Have the plants scattered, thousands of people growing. The DEA can't handle it.
Right.
That was the whole point. It was more federally oriented.
And to that point of what Tim's making, just expand a little bit. At the time.